Story number 1. The Haunting Glow of the Gold Mine. Juneau, Alaska, 1987. The town was steeped in shadows and cold, the air thick with whispers of old legends. The gold mines that had once been the lifeblood of the region now lay in eerie silence, their entrances sealed and overgrown. But for those of us who worked the night shifts in the remaining operational sections, the mines were far from silent. It started with the glow. The first time I saw it, I thought I was imagining things. I was deep in Tunnel 7, one of the oldest shafts still in use. My pickaxe swung rhythmically, the sound echoing through the cavern. When I noticed a faint light out of the corner of my eye, it shimmered in the darkness, a soft, golden glow that seemed to come from the collapsed section of the tunnel ahead. I froze, staring at it. The glow flickered, as if it were alive, and then disappeared as quickly as it had come. I rubbed my eyes and told myself it was just my imagination, a trick of the light reflecting off the damp walls. But I wasn't the only one. The glow became a regular occurrence. Others began to talk about it in hushed tones during our breaks, swapping stories over cigarettes and lukewarm coffee. Some said it was just a natural phenomenon, phosphorescent minerals catching the light of our lamps. Others whispered darker theories, ghosts of miners who had died in the collapses, their spirits trapped in the rock. Things escalated one night when a group of us decided to investigate. It was a slow shift, and curiosity got the better of us. Armed with lanterns and tools, we made our way toward the sealed-off section of the mine where the glow was most often seen. The closer we got, the colder the air became. It was the kind of cold that seeped into your bones, making you shiver no matter how many layers you wore. The glow appeared again, brighter this time, flickering like a flame just beyond the rubble. We paused, glancing at one another. No one wanted to say it, but we all felt it, the heavy, oppressive presence that seemed to hang in the air. "Let's keep going," Jack, our foreman, said, his voice tight with unease. As we approached the blocked-off tunnel, the glow vanished, plunging us into darkness. A nervous chuckle escaped one of the men, but it died in his throat when we heard it, a low, rumbling laugh that echoed through the shaft. It wasn't the laugh of a living man. It was guttural, otherworldly, rising and falling like the sound of shifting earth. My heart pounded as I swung my lantern around, but the light revealed nothing but empty tunnels and crumbling walls. "Did you hear that?" Charlie whispered, his voice shaking. Before anyone could answer, I felt it, a firm, icy grip on my shoulder. I spun around, my lantern swinging wildly, but there was no one there. My breath came in short, panicked gasps as I backed away, nearly tripping over my own feet. "We need to get out of here," I said, my voice trembling. No one argued. As we retreated, the laughter followed us, growing louder and more mocking with every step. The glow reappeared, darting from one side of the tunnel to the other, as if it were taunting us. By the time we reached the main shaft, we were running, our tools and gear abandoned in the darkness. The mine felt different after that night. The air was heavier, the shadows darker. Accidents became more frequent, tools slipping, supports failing, men disappearing into the depths, never to be seen again. The company tried to downplay it, calling it bad luck or human error, but we knew better. The final straw came 2 weeks later when another crew ventured into Tunnel 7. They were investigating a collapse that had cut off access to one of the lower shafts. None of them came back. When a rescue team was sent in, they found the tunnel completely sealed, as if by an unnatural force. The glow was seen again that night, brighter than ever, flickering like firelight in the distance. The mine was shut down soon after. Officially, it was due to safety concerns, but we all knew the truth. Whatever was down there didn't want us there, and it wasn't going to let us leave unscathed. Even now, years later, I can still see the glow in my dreams, hear the laughter echoing in my ears. I've tried to move on, to forget, but it's impossible. The mine calls to me, a siren song of gold and darkness that I know I can never answer. If you ever find yourself near the mines of Juneau, and you see a faint, golden light flickering in the darkness, don't follow it. Turn around. Leave, because some treasures aren't meant to be found, and some shadows aren't meant to be disturbed. Story number 2. The Stranger in the Dark. Fairbanks, Alaska, in 1972 was a harsh and unrelenting place. Its biting winds and endless stretches of snow-covered wilderness making it feel more like the edge of the world than a bustling town. I had been out of work for months, a victim of the same economic downturn that had sent dozens of men scrambling for any kind of employment. That's how I found myself at the entrance of an abandoned coal mine, shivering in the pre-dawn chill with 5 other desperate men. The mine had been closed for decades, deemed unsafe after a series of collapses. But rumors persisted that there were still untapped veins of coal deep within its tunnels. For men like us, who had nothing left to lose, it seemed worth the risk. We didn't talk much as we entered the mine, our boots crunching on the frozen ground. The air grew colder and heavier the deeper we went, carrying a faint metallic tang that clung to the back of my throat. The only light came from our lanterns, their flickering beams barely cutting through the oppressive darkness. It was on the second day that things started to feel off. The work was slow going, the walls of the mine stubborn and unyielding. We took turns chipping away at the rock, our pickaxes ringing out in the silent tunnels. But every so often, I thought I heard something else, a faint rustling, like footsteps just out of sight. When I turned, there was nothing there, just the endless shadows. "You're jumpy," Jack, our foreman, said with a grin as I glanced over my shoulder for the 3rd time that day. "It's just your imagination." Maybe he was right, or maybe he just didn't want to admit that he was feeling it too, that oppressive weight in the air, the sense that we were being watched. On the 3rd night, Sam saw him. We had set up camp in one of the larger caverns, a makeshift fire casting flickering shadows on the walls. Most of the men were asleep, but I was on watch when Sam let out a low, strangled gasp. "Over there," he whispered, pointing toward the far corner of the cavern. I followed his gaze and froze. First, I thought it was just another shadow, but then I saw the outline of a man, standing perfectly still at the edge of the light. He was dressed in old mining clothes, his face obscured by the brim of a battered hat. He didn't move, didn't make a sound, just stood there, watching us. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling. The figure didn't respond. He didn't even flinch. Jack, who had woken up at the commotion, grabbed a lantern and started toward him. The rest of us followed, our boots echoing in the cavern as we approached. But as we reached the spot where he had been standing, he was gone. There was no sign of him, no footprints in the dust, nothing. The incident left us rattled, but we tried to convince ourselves that it had been a trick of the light, our minds playing tricks on us in the dim tunnels. We returned to work the next day, but the mine seemed different now. The air was colder, heavier, the shadows felt deeper, more alive, and the noises were louder, scraping, shuffling, and faint whispers that seemed to come from all directions. Then came the laughter. It started faintly, a soft, eerie chuckle that echoed through the tunnels. First, we thought it was one of the men, but when we called out, the laughter stopped abruptly. When it started again, it was louder, closer, as if whoever or whatever it was had moved closer to us. On the 5th day, we found the grave. We were exploring a side tunnel when one of the men, Charlie, stumbled over something buried in the dirt. It was a wooden cross, weathered and rotting, marking what appeared to be a shallow grave. The name carved into the cross was illegible, worn away by time, but it was clear that someone had been laid to rest there. As we dug, we uncovered fragments of a mining helmet, rusted tools, and scraps of fabric that looked like they had once been part of a uniform. The realization hit us all at once. This was the grave of a miner, one who had likely died in one of the collapses that had closed the mine. The air grew colder as we stood there, staring at the grave, The whispers returned, louder now, echoing all around us. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw him again. The stranger was standing at the edge of the tunnel, his form barely visible in the flickering light. This time, his head was bowed, his shoulders slumped as if in mourning. "Leave," he whispered, his voice low and raspy, yet somehow carrying through the cavern. That was enough for me. "We're done here," I said, my voice shaking. "Let's go." We left the mine that night, abandoning our tools and supplies. None of us spoke as we trudged back to town, the weight of what we had seen pressing down on us. A week later, the mine was sealed. The entrance collapsed to prevent anyone else from going inside. I've thought about that man many times over the years. Was he a ghost, the restless spirit of a miner who had died in the collapse? Or was he something older, something tied to the mine itself? I don't know, and I don't want to know. But I do know this. If you ever find yourself in an abandoned mine, and you feel like you're not alone, leave. Some shadows are better left undisturbed. Story number 3. The Song from the Depths. Nome, Alaska, in 1943 was a place of unrelenting cold, vast stretches of tundra, and an air of isolation that clung to the soul. The gold rush had long since faded, but the allure of untapped veins kept men coming back, digging deeper into the frozen earth in search of fortune. I was one of them, a miner driven more by necessity than ambition. The mine we worked was an old one, long abandoned after the first rush of prospectors deemed it unprofitable. The company had sent us in with promises of hidden riches, but what we found there was something else entirely. We were 5 days into the dig when we first heard it. The tunnels were silent except for the rhythmic strike of pickaxes against stone and the occasional muttered curse. Then, faintly at first, came a sound that made us stop in our tracks. It was a voice, soft and melodic, drifting through the narrow shafts like a whisper carried on the wind. At first, we thought it was just the wind itself, squeezing through the cracks in the rock. But as we listened, it became unmistakable, a woman's voice, singing a haunting, unfamiliar tune. "Did you hear that, Jack?" the foreman asked, his voice hushed. "Probably just the wind," Sam said, though his hands trembled as he lit a cigarette. None of us believed him. We tried to shake it off, chalking it up to the acoustics of the tunnels playing tricks on us. But the song didn't stop. It grew clearer with each passing hour, weaving through the shafts like a ghostly thread, impossible to ignore. On the third day, we began seeing things. Shadows moved where there shouldn't have been any, flickering just beyond the light of our lanterns. Tools disappeared and reappeared in places we hadn't left them. The air grew colder the deeper we went, an unnatural chill that seeped into our bones no matter how hard we worked. Then Charlie saw her. We were digging in one of the deeper tunnels when he froze, his pickaxe slipping from his hands. His face went pale, and he pointed toward the end of the shaft. "Do you see her?" I turned, squinting into the darkness. First, I saw nothing, just the flicker of the lanterns against the damp walls. Then, like a figure emerging from a dream, she appeared. She was at the very edge of the light, a pale figure draped in a flowing white gown that seemed to shimmer as she moved. Her hair was long and dark, obscuring her face as she glided silently across the tunnel. "What the hell?" Jack started, but before he could finish, she vanished, dissolving into the shadows as though she had never been there. The mine grew more oppressive after that. The singing became constant, an eerie backdrop to our work. None of us wanted to admit it, but we all felt it, that we were being watched. It wasn't just the woman. It was the mine itself, felt alive, aware, as though it resented our presence. Sam was the first to leave. One morning, we found his bunk empty, his gear gone. He hadn't said a word to anyone, just packed up and disappeared. We figured he'd had enough, and frankly, none of us blamed him. But his departure didn't stop the strange occurrences. The singing grew louder, more insistent, echoing through the tunnels in a way that made it impossible to tell where it was coming from. Sometimes it sounded close, as if the singer were standing right behind us. Other times it was distant, fading into the depths of the mine. The breaking point came on the seventh day. We had reached what we believed to be the heart of the mine, a vast chamber lined with veins of glittering gold. For a moment, we forgot about the singing, the shadows, the cold. We were richer than we had ever dreamed. Then the ground began to tremble. It started as a low rumble, barely perceptible, but quickly grew into a violent shaking that sent rocks tumbling from the ceiling. The lanterns flickered and died, plunging us into darkness. And through it all, the singing continued, louder than ever, piercing and mournful. That's when we saw her again. She stood in the center of the chamber, her gown glowing faintly in the dark. This time, her face was visible, a pale, gaunt visage with hollow eyes that seemed to stare straight through us. Her mouth moved as she sang, the sound resonating in our chests like a physical force. "Run," Jack whispered, his voice barely audible over the cacophony. We didn't need to be told twice. We dropped everything and ran, stumbling over rocks and debris as the mine threatened to collapse around us. The singing followed us, growing fainter the closer we got to the surface, until finally, we burst into the open air, gasping for breath. We never went back. The company sent another crew to investigate, but they found nothing, no gold, no signs of the woman, just an empty, abandoned mine. They sealed the entrance shortly after, deeming it too unstable to work. Years later, I heard rumors about the mine, whispers of a tragedy that had occurred there during its first operation. A woman had been killed in a collapse. Her body never recovered. Some said she had been the wife of a miner. Others that she was a stranger who had wandered in seeking shelter. No one knew for sure, but the stories all agreed on one thing: her spirit had never left. To this day, I can still hear her song in my dreams, a mournful melody that chills me to the bone. I've tried to forget, to move on, but some things stay with you, no matter how far you run. If you ever find yourself in Nome, Alaska, and hear a voice singing from deep underground, don't follow it. Leave, because some songs are meant to remain unsung.